I'm coming, Paddy, last. It's kind of hard to have a lot of your questions in your head, but no, second, Paddy, last, yeah. I just want to go back to the question of hedging, because all of the explanations that you have given about the market and how it works, and EU legislation where there's a common set of powers across the EU, and then individual states have implement their own set of powers beyond that. So you're saying to us that when it comes to hedging, you can't monitor or take statistics from the companies about how long they hedged, or when they hedged. And to that extent, is it not sort of just guesswork on the part of Crew to look at these companies and see what they're doing and how they're doing, if you can't look behind, or behind that screen? And if you don't have the powers in Ireland to, and other countries do Crew not see that as a big disadvantage? And particularly when ordinary households, and we've talked about this a lot today, whose backs are to the wall, and increase in the number of people particularly falling into arrears in gas prices, in gas bills, and therefore this is particularly related to gas prices and hedging. Does that not make Crew's role very much lessened and impacted in terms of what it can do to regulate the market? Because at the end of the day, the people at the end of the market are the consumers who are in arrears, the over 200,000 of them now. And that's very worrying for us as elected reps, that you can't intervene, don't intervene. And do you ever ask the Minister, can you have extra powers like other EU states have in order to track this properly? Because the profits are eye-watering, and that's what ordinary people see. They see, for example, ESB's profits doubled to 650 million last year. Energy is rising by 102 or 112 million, whatever the exact statistic is. But these are what people see. Profits of gas companies going through the absolute roof, while their bills are also going through the roof, and it not being passed on. And just to repeat the question that was asked, when you say, and you do in your submission, we encourage companies to pass it on, what does that mean? Sit down and have a cup of coffee with them, like the Minister will tomorrow with the grocery sector, and say, please, will you do this, that and the other? It really isn't good enough that we don't have a regulator in this country that can really regulate on these issues. So I would ask you to comment on that. The second thing is, when we look at the stats for Ireland, we're I think it's the third highest in energy prices. We used to be the lowest. I refute this argument about competition, because the ESB, when it was in national control, delivered the lowest domestic prices. And I've heard an argument here that investment had to be brought in order to encourage, changes and upgrade the system. But we're still way behind in what's required to create clean energy. So when you say that the market has worked in terms of domestic costs, why are we still the third highest in terms of cost to the consumer in the whole of Europe? And my last question is on the windfall tax proposals, because it's a bit similar to the question Deputy O'Rourke answered, but considering that Crew didn't have the power to control or protect domestic heating system customers, maybe you do now, maybe you could clarify that, but certainly the last time you were in here you didn't have that power, and domestic heating systems, the customers in those systems were really subject to very high charges, and they can't shop around. They're stuck with the one provider. So do you envisage that you're equipped to regulate and to administer the price cap in the windfall that's contained in the windfall tax bill? There's my three questions.
Okay, so I'll take one or two of those. I'll pass to my colleague Paul McGowan on district heating, and then I'll pass to Commissioner McGowan, if that's okay, Deputy Smith. In terms of the windfall tax or the IMR cap on revenues, we do believe that the legislative proposal is a strong one. We do believe that as it is currently drafted, it should allow us to recoup those surplus revenues from the energy companies where they arose, and to then allow the government to develop policy around how those are redistributed. So we've yet to see the detailed outturn of that, but we're preparing ourselves internally against what has been passed through this committee, and we're confident that we will be able to do that. That may give us further insight into the practices and the approaches taken within that period of some of the supply companies, at least in relation to hedging, which will give us some insight into that. In terms of district heating, I might pass to Commissioner McGowan.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Deputy. So the powers in relation to district heating are completely separate to any matter of windfall tax. They're not related. We have been given some limited powers in relation to district heating. These are very specific powers under the Renewable Energy Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive, particularly around identifying the requirements for billing and information on billing. When we were last in with you, we spoke about the fact that what we actually need to do is develop a broad regulatory framework for district heating in Ireland in order to match Ireland's ambitions for the district heating sector. And that work has been undertaken by the steering group that has been set up across the various agencies and the department. We're awaiting the publication of the initial report, and then the work will start in earnest in relation to defining that regulatory framework. To be very specific, the instances that you refer to, the customers in relation to their prices, that is not a matter that would come under the current district heating powers that we have been given. So just to be absolutely clear on that.
And do you expect to get further powers on that?
We expect, as I said, the powers that we have right now in district heating are very targeted, and they relate to the Energy Efficiency Directive and the Renewable Energy Directive implementation. We expect that there's going to be a broad regulatory framework very akin to what we have in electricity and gas around district heating, but that framework has yet to be designed, legislated for and implemented, and that as you can appreciate, you will fully appreciate, will take a period of time.
Like another 5 years?
I can't answer that question, Deputy. Yes. I genuinely can't answer that question, I'm sorry.
In relation to one or two of the other questions, and then I might ask Commissioner McEvely to pick up if there's anything I haven't addressed. In terms of Ireland and high energy prices, we are an isolated country at the end of a long set of wires and pipes. We have very low levels of indigenous primary fuels to help us out in terms of what we had. Oil, gas, coal, with declining gas, if anything, in the country. And importation of gas will probably continue to get more expensive over time, and is also more carbon intensive than our own national resources. Separately, I mentioned Acer's report earlier, where gas dependency and a higher gas dependency did mean that we were subject to those higher prices more than other countries, and that remains the case. Again, we are at the end of a pipe from the North Sea and other resources. Low interconnection also factors into it, notwithstanding the fact that that now is being addressed through the Celtic Interconnector, Green Link Interconnector, and there is more interest in further interconnection from the UK and perhaps other jurisdictions. This will be very important in terms of us being able to move from the renewable energies that we have satisfying our own targets and our own demand to making sure that we can satisfy other markets and generate wealth, national wealth, from our natural resources. I think finally, we do have a dispersed population by comparison to other European countries. This does mean that we have more wires and that we need to develop more wires but also maintain those wires. So it's critical that we invest in those wires, but that is more expensive and will continue to be more expensive.
So wires is the reason why we're so much higher than other European countries. I don't accept that. We're a tiny island.
No, it's a combination of the factors that I have outlined there. For the population that we have, we are more dispersed. If we were a population in cities, we would need less wires than we currently need. And again, to get us to that point, it will require investment in order to facilitate our decarbonisation. But after that period of investment, that is where we should have indigenous supply be less exposed to the vagaries of international energy markets and be in a more secure and sustainable place, economically, as well as from an environmental perspective. Commissioner McEvely.
So I think just to turn back to your question around how are we monitoring hedging activity or monitoring price development, if you like, in the market. So we do undertake ongoing market analysis. Our team look at international price drivers. We look at the indigenous drivers around increasing network charges, and we track, I suppose, what's happening with retail prices against the price drivers that we see. What we find over time is that the retail prices are following the underlying market and network price drivers, but at a lag because of the hedging. And we have not seen anything to change that view. That doesn't require us to go into depth in each individual hedging strategy of each individual supplier. It's more the broader market evolution of prices versus the evolution of the price drivers. But if that changes, then of course we will come back and look at what is happening and what action do we need to take to ensure that households are protected, because we know that there are households out there that are really struggling. We can see it in the numbers, but we hear it on the phones when people are calling in and they are in real trouble. So we are really anxious to see this happening as well. And the conversations we have with suppliers are challenging conversations based on the data that we have in front of us and with the clarity that we're giving them, that we expect to see this happening. We expect to see what we've always said, which is that the prices follow on from the market trends. And we've been very clear to them as well that we're not here to be apologists for electricity suppliers in their pricing strategies. And actually we've been challenging them a little bit about why they aren't out explaining to their customers a bit better where they are in terms of, hedging and what customers can expect. But the reason we're trying to explain this is we don't want, we are concerned to manage expectation for customers that suddenly prices are going to go back down to where they were, because the reality is, as Commissioner Gannon has pointed out, wholesale prices are still about double where they were. So it's coming down slower than we'd all like, and it won't come down to the level it was before. And that's just the clarity we're trying to provide to customers. And that's important because the customers who are in debt now really need to be actively seeking support so that when we're coming into next winter, they're not in a worse position. And that's why we're also reviewing the customer protections for next winter, because our concern is, we will still need customer protections for the customers who are in debt now. So that's where we are.
Well, quick yes or no, Ms Machiavelli. Would you like to see the Irish government give you additional powers and functions, as other EU states have, to monitor what's happening in the market?
At the moment, we have not identified an additional power related to market monitoring that we need at this point in time. We're watching what's coming from Europe in terms of broader hedging, but there's nothing we've identified as a significant gap right now.
Thanks very much.
Okay.